Today I want to share with you the exciting and amazing art of bread making. Bread making is an art that goes back thousands and thousands of years. It is amazing that you take 3 ingredients, flour, water, and salt, mix them together, bake them, roast them. Now, sometimes you add a leavener, like yeast. You have different kinds of bread. I'm just showing you one kind of flour. There are all kinds of flours out there. They can be mixed. But basically 3 ingredients to make life-saving bread. A food that has sustained population all over the world for thousands of years and still does today. Now the type of bread we're going to do today is a multigrain bread. As you know, processed flour and white flour doesn't have all the nutrients that are good for you. So by mixing some of that for that high gluten that will provide the elasticity to the dough and all the types of grains in that you mix together to make a delicious bread, also more nutritious. And this is what we're gonna do today, a multigrain bread. So without further ado, let's start baking. Let us start with measuring and weighing in baking. So anyway, here we have a scale and you have your spoon. So depending on what your recipe tells you to do. You have an off and on button, you can turn it on. Then you have a mode tar. Here it looks like it's on grams. The recipe it's in pound and ounces. So you press on mode and now you pound in ounces. The other thing is it should be 0 with nothing on it. Now you can't put the food, you can't put your flour, sugar, salt on this, right? You need a container. So you place the container. Now you see 5/8 of an ounce. That's the weight of your container. You don't want to have to do the math. You just press mode tar and now you're on grams, but we're gonna press again for the mode and you are on pound and ounces. It's 0. So whatever container you put on there, it could be a bowl, it could be this container, whatever you put on there, it brings it to 0. So now you can add the product to the weight that you have on your recipe. Okay, so we're gonna do the flour. I'm not gonna bore you with doing all the details like this. I'm gonna show you just one of the ingredients, which is the largest one, the high gluten flour unbleached, and the recipe calls for 1 pound. Now I'm going to use a bread flour. Make sure it is a bread flour, artisan bread or not. I'm not going to promote a brand. You can find bread flour in most of your best grocery stores out there, and I'm using a scooper just to get it in there, and you can see about 4 something ounces. Try to keep it in the container as much as possible. So you cannot convert tablespoons or scoop and weight for dry ingredients. It only works for water. To avoid mistakes, I always like to avoid conversion altogether. So here we are. I went past. I got 3 ounces extra. Now this is the process. That container holds a pound. All the other flours are gonna be less than a pound, so I'm gonna use the same plastic container for measuring purpose and the same scale. And now I'm gonna move to a mixer with a hook. You may have a different model, and that is fine too. Or you can also do it by hand. Whenever you can use a machine, I recommend that. If you want to build some muscles, that is fine too. So here we are, a mixer we're gonna use. I'm gonna add the dry ingredient into the bowl, and I'm gonna add all the flours, salt, so I can pre-mix it, and we'll go to the next step. 1 pound 8 ounces of water. Now I'm gonna place it in the microwave to warm it up. Follow the instructions of the microwave. You just want to bring it to about 110 degrees Fahrenheit temperature. In my microwave on high, it took about a minute to get to the right temperature. Now I'm gonna, with a whisk, I'm gonna incorporate gradually the 2 ounces of dry yeast. This is dry yeast that gets mixed with the liquid right here. Now There is a fine instant dry yeast that's a little bit different. You just mix it in with the various flours, all the dry ingredients. So these are the difference between the dry yeast or the instant dry yeast. So follow the instructions on the yeast packages. So here I am now. I'm adding progressively the yeast in the water, 110 degrees Fahrenheit, and mix it in with a whisk. To dissolve it evenly. Make sure it's all in. All dissolved. Takes a few minutes. And when it's all dissolved, we'll be ready to put in the dry ingredient. Make sure it's all dissolved in the bottom. It looks pretty good. Now we're going to premix the dry ingredients, all the flours and the salt. On low speed, high speed, and everything might fly all over the place. It is important to premix the flour so that everything will be even, but also with the salt, because when you start pouring the yeast, which is a living ingredient, some sort of a mushroom, if you will, like a fungus that live and breathe, and if you pour it directly on salt, the salt will kill it. Now I'm going to start pouring the water with the yeast progressively, but not too slow. Allow a few turns of the hook for the flour to be absorbed. And when I make a dough, I'm always get ready to add more water if I have to. At that point, a little extra water, the temperature doesn't really matter. Tap water is fine at room temperature. And by the same token, I'm ready to put a little flour if the dough appears to be too soft. For the adjustment, you just need your basic bread flour. You see the ball starts forming. It looks pretty good. I'm going to stop it to check the consistency of that dough. I just dip my finger with a little flour to check. It's fairly soft. It looks pretty good. I may want a little softer, so I'll add just a little bit of water. Now, a little water go a long way, so you want to be careful not to overdo it. You're gonna let it mix. Once it's all mixed and you're happy with the consistency of the dough, initially you're gonna have to let it mix and develop the gluten, the elasticity of that dough. This is what's gonna give you a good bread. This is something you do for yeast dough, yeast leavening. By the meantime, I'm going to start assembling some of the molds, and I'm going to spray the inside of the molds. You can use different types of loaf pan, or you could do different shape. This will make a wonderful, healthy pizza crust. I'm increasing the speed a bit. I'm going to spray the loaf pan. You could butter them with butter or any kind of fat with a brush, if you will. Nowadays, use a spray is more convenient. And I have a larger loaf here, but you use whatever loaf pan that you have in the house. I am not preheating the oven quite yet. There'll be a proofing process, and there'll be time for your oven to preheat. Probably 30 minutes. We're gonna go for 25 if you want a little bit of a softer bread. So I'm gonna check that dough. Check. Consistency, it's nice and soft. Our pans are ready to go. Mise en place. Mise en place is a French term for everything in its place. This will give you a few loaves, the yield of that, depending on the size of your loaves. Now I think our dough is going to be just right. Now the flour is still mixing in. Now you can see the dough starts forming a ball, lifting itself up the sides of the ball. It's a good sign. It's climbing a little bit on the hook, and then it's really getting smoother texture. It's developing its gluten nice and even. like the look of that dough. It's looking very nice. Be careful with the machine. The machine is so happy that it's going to get off the countertop. Now, when you make dough like this, it's not a bad idea to rest it on a wet cloth to keep it in place. It's no longer sticking to the inside of the ball. It's really beautiful. A couple of more minutes, we'll be ready to go. I'm gonna do the cloth trick to show you how it stays in place. Right now it's getting out of hand. Let's see if this will keep it in place. In my teaching, I'm gonna show you a lot of tricks things that you don't see in the books, in a lot of other cooking videos. Here we are. So let's turn on the machine again. It's almost done though. And you see it's really staying in place. Now, as I get ready to stop it, another little trick, I'm gonna dust a little flour at the moment that I turn off the switch off so that the dough doesn't stick to the ball. Watch this. I got my hand on the switch, getting ready to turn it off. I got flour in my hand, finger on the switch, and then at the same time, voila, little trick. As it stops to keep the dough from sticking to the bowl. Now lowering the bowl, undoing the hook, it's the dough, flour, of the dusting flour. Now one way to see that your dough is ready, you take a little piece of dough, a little flour on your finger, and then you see if it stretches like a balloon. And you can look it up, hold it up in the light and see that it makes a window. So basically you see the stretchability of that dough and it works very well. This is what's gonna allow it to proof and develop into a beautiful bread. So I'm gonna keep it in this bowl. I'm gonna cover it with a cloth, let it proof. Now, here we are in Texas in the summer, and I discovered that the best way to proof something, especially during the daytime, it's in your garage. So you don't have to deal with the AC. No AC and plenty of humidity. Now, depending on the area where you live at, if you are in a colder area, you can put your oven on the lowest setting. We're talking about maybe 150 degrees, almost just a pallet light of your oven, and put a little pan of water in there for a little steam created, and then cover your dough and let it proof in there. So let's get a cloth, colorful cloth here. Just to avoid excess drying, you could use some plastic also, and I'm gonna take it to the garage, and then we'll get back after proofing to start the shaping process. Once you start the shaping process, you still have proof the final product, so at that point I'll preheat the oven. Now I just got the dough. It just deflated a little bit on my way back from the garage, but you see that's proofed nicely. That's double in volume, so it's time to take a container of dusting flour. For dusting flour, you can use just regular AP flour. So I'm gonna dust some flour on the bench, and I'm gonna get that dough out of the bowl, knock it down, and shape it in what shape I want. Knock all the air out. It looks like it's got a very nice texture. And use the scale to be consistent in your loaf. Here we're going to improvise again a little bit, because I don't know what size of pan you're going to have at home. And then I got three loaf pan, one smaller loaf pan, and one larger loaf pan, and that's it. So now I'm gonna prepare the loaf pan first. Don't add too much flour, just make a package like this, tight, roll the end tight, roll it tight, and there we go, nice. And then we're gonna put it into the large loaf pan. that has been pre-sprayed, and I will cover this in with film. We'll use a cloth and allow it to double in size. So I'm going to do the same thing here. Roll it tight, roll it. And the smaller pans, these are pretty shallow pan, but they will work for the purpose. Most of that bread I use, slice it. Breakfast in the morning, butter jam in the cafe au lait. But that's me. It's also very good with cold cuts, charcuterie, great with anything really you want to eat it with. So my second pan. And as it proves, I'm gonna preheat the oven, bake, and make sure that nothing is in the oven, no surprises. Oven is empty, pre-bake, bake, increase the temperature to 425 this time. Now it's preheating. It's probably gonna take 30 minutes to preheat. Depending on what you're looking for, if you want a harder crust, you want a hotter oven. Softer crust, you can go with a lower temperature oven. So I'm gonna put this on the sheet pan. Cover them with a cloth and allow them to proof. There, there. And I can use a cloth that we've used earlier. Voila. So they don't form a crust. And I'm gonna set them aside, let them proof. Voila. Now they are proofed enough, they're more than double in size. I'm just gonna spray some water on them to give them a little more elasticity on top. And place them in the oven. Bottom of the oven, preheated a tray, and I will throw a little bit of water to create some steam. The steam will help develop the bread, keep some elasticity, so that at the developing stage, oven spring of the baking, it can expand more before the bread starts getting hot enough to coagulate. Goes in the oven, pour the water in, close the door, keep the steam in. Coming out of the oven, the smaller pan, looking good. Sounds hollow when you tap on top of it. We're gonna remove them right away from the pan, down here. And so we put them on a cooling rack so that the steam in it can escape and they cool nice and evenly. So the small pan are done. Great color, great doneness. 2 small loaves are ready to go on the cooling rack. If you're gonna wrap them, if you don't eat them right away, make sure you allow them to come to room temperature before you wrap them in plastic. You could keep them in the refrigerator for at least a week as you eat it, but also you could freeze it, wrap it in plastic, and then freeze it. Save bread bags for store-bought, and recycle those bags to wrap my delicious wholesome bread. Subscribe, share. Thank you for watching.